Hello and welcome to my show, Shuvra Deb with you, with me, your host, Shuvra Deb. In this show, I will be discussing mental health with the aim of raising mental health awareness in our community and in society as a whole. The genesis of the show is my own pivotal life-changing experience of being in a Category 5 hurricane back in 2017. That experience led me to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. I am hosting this show in order to let you know that you are not alone if something life-changing has happened to you from which you are struggling to heal. Shuvra Deb with you focuses on a range of topics relevant to mental health and to raising awareness of issues surrounding mental health. Hello everyone and welcome back to my show, Shuvra Deb with you. I hope that you are all doing really well. As you all know by now, and for those of you tuning in for the first time, my show is about raising awareness around the topic of mental health. I want us all to be living in a society where looking after our own mental health and the mental health of those we love and care about is no longer stigmatized, as is currently the case in society. I want us all to live in a world where we no longer make the distinction between mental and physical health, and where each and every aspect of our health is considered in an inclusive and holistic way. Whilst my show is about raising awareness around the issue of mental health, I do want to make it clear at the very outset that I'm not a mental health professional and I'm not a doctor. If you need to seek professional help, I wholeheartedly encourage you to do exactly that. And we have a great number of options here in the Cayman Islands where you can reach out for support. Infinite Mind Care provides counselling services and can be telephoned on 926-0882. The Alex Panton Foundation offers support to people up to the age of 30, and their information is on their website, alexpantonfoundation.ky. Loud Silent Voices provides mental health support too, and their number is 922-3847. And their email is info@lsv.support. And I also love hearing what you guys have to say about my discussion topics. So please do continue to reach out to me with your comments and your questions and anything that you'd like to say. If there's something that you'd like to hear me talk about, then please let me know. You can get me on my email, which is shuvradeb82@gmail.com, spelt SHUVRA DEB, the numbers 82@gmail.com. So moving on to today's show, I am so pumped and excited and all whoop-de-doo to announce that my full podcast is now up and available and fully launched on Spotify. All episodes on there are now up to date and available on demand. The other platforms, Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts, are on their way, but in the meantime, my podcast on Spotify is free to listen to. Just type in Shuvra Deb with you. That's my name, which you have the spelling of, and the words with you, spelt WITHYOU. Please do subscribe, follow, share, and review the show. I really appreciate all of your feedback, so please do let me know your views and tell your friends. If you're enjoying my content, then just tell your friends. So, with that in mind, and in order to give you a flavour of what my show is about and what you may expect from the podcast, I'm going to give you a little summary of each of the episodes so far and how they relate to raising awareness around the topic of mental health. That way, you can have an idea of what to expect from my podcast, and you can go straight to a particular episode that calls to you that you feel you're interested in. My regular listeners will be aware that the genesis of this entire show is from my own experience of suffering a big traumatic event. That event was Hurricane Irma in the British Virgin Islands in 2017. I discuss on episode 1 that on 6 September 2017, Hurricane Irma came barreling into the Eastern Caribbean, damaging and destroying many of the islands in that chain, the Lesser Antilles Islands. Of course, all of the stats on that are available for anyone to review on the internet. And up until my experience of actually being involved in a full-blown natural disaster, I was honestly quite relaxed about what it all meant. I mean, of course, I felt sadness for the people suffering from these events, whether it was Hurricane Katrina, which had been solidly etched in my memory due to the sheer heartbreaking destruction and loss that that had caused, which we'd all seen in the news back in the UK in 2005. Or whether, fast forwarding a little, it was the deadly landslide that had taken place in and around Freetown, the capital of Sierra Leone, on the 14th of August 2017, only some 3 weeks prior to the date of Hurricane Irma making landfall. Of course, I felt sad for each and every individual experiencing those events. But what I lacked was true empathy. What I lacked was true compassion. And that was because I had not the slightest idea what it actually meant to be in fear of my own life, thinking with real conviction that the next gust of wind could be what takes away the doors or the windows of the room that we were taking shelter in. I had not the slightest idea what it actually meant to have your home quite literally blow away, with half of it in the ocean and the other half of it hanging off of a cliff. I had not the slightest idea what it actually meant to wake up the following day and not see a sign of life, and wholeheartedly, to my core, believe that all my friends, save the 3 other people with whom I was taking shelter, had died, that I may never see any of those friends again, that quite possibly they had died in unimaginable agony, clinging on to something in the middle of this monster storm, clinging on for their dear lives. I had not the slightest idea what it actually meant, after all of that, to live in a disaster zone, navigating scenes from what could easily at times have been the movie set of an apocalypse film, at other times the movie set of a horror film, and yet at other times be the movie set from the series Lost or scenes from the book Lord of the Flies. So there I was, feeling sad for people involved in natural disasters, but not really feeling the extent of empathy or compassion, which I know I am now capable of feeling. And then just like that, everything changed. After Irma, more natural disasters followed in quick succession. On the 19th of September 2017, an earthquake with a magnitude of 7.1 shook Mexico, with the epicenter being just outside of Mexico City, causing mass and severe destruction. Hurricane Maria was next, making landfall in Puerto Rico on the 20th of September as yet another severe Category 5 storm. And, of course, just days after my own natural disaster experience, I was watching all of this unfold on the television. And rather than feeling sad for the people who were going through this, I was full on bawling my eyes out, sobbing uncontrollably at the sights and the sounds of the destruction in Puerto Rico and Mexico. I was feeling so much heartfelt compassion for the people going through what I knew was a journey to hell, hoping they would make it back somehow from hell. It was only much later, around about a year later, that I realized that feeling that level of debilitating sadness, empathy, compassion, whatever you want to call it, was not favorable to anyone, least of all to me. Me feeling sad and sobbing for other people's experiences wasn't going to make an iota of change to their lives or bring them anything useful. Me feeling sad and sobbing in such a way that I was unable to function and live life was not doing me any good, not at all. But you see, what had happened to me, what had happened to cause this reaction, this overreaction, if you like, to other people's plights and misfortunes, was that my brain and body had been switched to fight or flight mode during the Irma experience. And after the storm was over, after I had had the fortune to leave the aftermath behind, not everyone was so lucky, my brain remained in fight or flight mode. And that's because I was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. The part of the brain that identifies whether incoming information is relevant for survival is called the amygdala. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, one of the world's leading experts on trauma and trauma recovery, in his excellent book, The Body Keeps the Score, puts it in the following way. If the amygdala senses a threat, a potential collision with an oncoming vehicle, a person on the street who looks threatening, it sends an instant message to the brain. Dr. van der Kolk goes on to say, the stress hormone system and the autonomic nervous system is recruited to orchestrate a whole body response. Once the danger is past, the body returns to its normal state fairly quickly, But, and this is key in traumatized people, people with PTSD, when recovery is blocked, the body is triggered to defend itself, which makes people feel agitated and aroused. In PTSD sufferers, that state of agitation or arousal remains in place because during a traumatic event, the brain goes into the fight or flight mode. And for the sufferer of PTSD, the brain gets stuck in fight or flight mode. That response, which can manifest in the form of always being in a state of hypervigilance, for example, becomes solidified in the brain. It becomes the only way in which the PTSD sufferer knows how to respond to an event, no matter how benign that event might be. Dr. van der Kolk states, if the interpretation of threat by the amygdala is too intense, and or the filtering system from the relevant areas of the brain are too weak, as often happens in PTSD, people lose control over automatic emergency responses like prolonged startle or aggressive outburst. So, when suffering PTSD, the sufferer's reactions to many ordinary events may be horrifically out of hand by objective standards. To give you some examples of what happened to me, getting lost in the hotel we were staying in after Irma and post-evacuation from BVI, sheer panic. Discovering that the sandwich I wanted to eat in the coffee shop was no longer available, intense frustration. Waiting in a queue and the people in front taking what I considered to be a long time. Inexplicable anger. Being locked out of my hotel room because of a technical issue with the keycard. Collapsing into a heap and inexplicably bursting into a bout of tears. So much so that the poor person working in the hotel and helping me had to go and get one of my friends who had to come and calm me down. Some people said to me I was overreacting. And by common objective standards, I was overreacting. Except, at the same time, I was not overreacting. I was reacting in the only way I knew how to react. The stress reaction or flight or fight response had become my new normal. My brain had lost its ability to regulate emotion and behavioral responses, had lost its ability to know whether the fight or flight response, whether that state of hypervigilance was in fact necessary. I continued to react, to suffer in this way for over a year after Irma. And the reason for that was that I had not the faintest clue that there was all this stuff going on in my brain where my amygdala was stuck, where I was reacting in ways I would otherwise not be reacting had I not been suffering with PTSD. So when the threat of Hurricane Florence came along, that storm was due to hit the island that I was then living on, which was no longer BVI, on the exact one-year anniversary of Hurricane Irma. That day quite possibly saved my life. Whilst the hurricane did not hit where I was living and sadly did make landfall elsewhere, the anticipation of it caused me completely to break down. And so, the next day, I got help. The next day, I was referred to a clinical psychologist. And it was with my clinical psychologist, Jen, that I was diagnosed as having PTSD. And from that moment, my treatment began. So, that's where all of this show comes from. Having spent over a year trapped inside my own head, having spent over a year feeling like I was insane, having spent over a year feeling numb, physically, emotionally, mentally, unable to relate to people, unable to have conversations at times, unable to remember past memories, words, concepts, having spent over a year experiencing all sorts of other really unpleasant experiences and symptoms. Having been through all of that, and only for just over a year. Some people suffer with PTSD or other mental illnesses for decades before they get the help they need. Having been through all of that, I do not want any other person anywhere to go through what I went through, not even for a minute. So here I am, doing what I can to raise awareness around the fact that mental health, mental illnesses are real life and prevalent issues. I do believe, though, that we can all contribute to looking after our own mental health. We can all educate ourselves on the signs and symptoms of mental illness, for example, in the same way that we do with our physical health. All of these topics that I discuss are on my first show called Hurricane to Healing. On that show, I also discuss some of the steps that we can take in aid of treating mental illness and maintaining healthy mental health. If you'd like to tune in and have a listen, the show is available on Spotify and is free to listen to, available on demand. Outside of the context of an event or events of trauma, another major cause of both mental and physical health issues is stress. So, on episode 2, Standing Still to Move Forward, I discuss why it is so important for us all to be able to de-stress and maintain a good state of health. Dr. van der Kolk writes about the new book by Dr. Gabor Mate, who is another renowned expert in trauma and recovery and treatment for trauma. The book is called The Myth of Normal: Trauma, Illness and Healing in a Toxic Culture. Dr. van der Kolk says of Dr. Mate's book, in The Myth of Normal, Gabor Mate takes us on an epic journey of discovery about how our emotional well-being and our social connectivity, in short, how we live, are intimately intertwined with health, disease, and addictions. Chronic mental and physical illnesses may not be separate and distinct diseases, but intricate, multi-layered processes that reflect the maladaptations to the cultural context that we live in and the values we live by. As regards stress management and what we can do on a practical level to manage our stress, is to follow what I call in my second episode, my 15-minute rule. My 15-minute rule is the practice of taking just 15 minutes a day to find a way to de-stress. It may be 15 minutes to meditate at home or to have a yoga practice, to take a dip in the ocean or take a walk around our strata or neighbourhood. A study undertaken by University College London found that it takes roughly, on average, 66 days to form a new habit. That's around 2 months, and that figure is within a range. According to the study, some people are able to form a habit in just 18 days, which is less than 3 weeks. So, if we start the 15-minute rule, for example, to take 15 minutes a day to meditate or to go for a walk, it will soon become a habit, and it will be a habit that contributes towards lowering our stress levels. By de-stressing, not only will we experience mental and physical health benefits, which I will come back to, but we may also be inspired. Archimedes famously had his eureka moment whilst taking a bath. In the act of taking a bath, he was so inspired that he worked out the scientific principles behind what makes an object sink or float, and Archimedes' findings are still used in shipbuilding and water travel today. Isaac Newton was famously sitting under a tree when he saw an apple fall to the ground. From that comes what we know to be gravity. Similarly, you may be working on a project, either at home or at work, or you may be trying to solve a problem of some sort. Or you may be trying to answer a legal question that's complicated. As you can probably tell, this is where a lot of my wild wanderings come from if you've ever caught me out on a seemingly random walk. And more often than not, by taking that chill space, getting some fresh air, taking that time out, inspiration flows, and we feel slightly less stressed by whatever it is that might be causing us to feel stressed. In terms of the physical benefits of managing our stress, there are many. PsychCentral.com tells us that reducing stress may reduce blood pressure. The article on the website states that according to a large 2021 study, stress is linked with changes in blood pressure. High blood pressure is also known as hypertension. It's linked with stroke and chronic and coronary heart disease and is responsible for around 12.8% of deaths worldwide, and this number is expected to keep growing. Improving our stress levels will also likely improve our mental health. According to the PsychCentral.com article, mental health conditions like depression and anxiety are often linked to stress. For instance, a 2020 study examined the stress levels of nearly 12,000 college students. It found that uncertainty stress, defined as anxiety in facing ambiguous situations and problematic environments, was linked with high levels of mental health conditions. Managing stress can also improve heart health. The article says about this, chronic stress can affect your heart rate. A 2020 study assessed the long-term stress levels of 328 office workers and measured their heart rate over 5 days. The study found that chronic stress can increase your heart rate, disrupt your circadian rhythm and sleep, and increase the risk of heart disease. If you're interested in learning more about the effects of stress on our physical and mental health and some of the things that we can do to ease stress, then please do tune in and have a listen to my second episode, which is called Standing Still to Move Forward. I also take you through a cool little guided meditation in that show, so please do go take a listen. On my third episode, I delve into one of life's biggest questions and how we may go about answering it. That is, what is our purpose in life? What is our true life's purpose? Which kind of flows on from managing our stress. By finding our true life's purpose, we find more joy in our lives. And having more joy in our life experience reduces the level at which we may encounter stress. Of course, and naturally, there will be moments when it all does become just a bit too much and we get stressed. But by living in flow with our purpose and by living in a state of joy, the incidences of stress reduce. I speak frequently about Deepak Chopra and his teachings. On Deepak Chopra's website, someone has written to him and posed a question about fulfillment. The person asking the question describes his life, which he says, on the face of it, looks very satisfying and pleasing. He says he's a 35-year-old husband and father with a 6-figure salary, but says that he's dissatisfied in his career. The writer then goes on to say that when he tries to think of what he would rather be doing, his mind simply goes to a vision of himself lying on a beach without a care in the world. Deepak's response to this is that the vision of the writer lying on the beach in paradise only reflects his wish for a vacation from his presently unsatisfying life. Deepak says that in order for the writer to go from feeling dissatisfied and feeling that he wants to run away from it all, to get to a place of meaning, what he needs to do is to search deeper within himself. Deepak suggests that he makes a solid list of his talents and passions. Think of the gifts you have that you can offer to make this a better world for your family and for everyone you touch in your life, which may all sound easier said than done. So on my third show, which is called Knowing Your True Purpose in Life, I discuss the DISC test, which is a personality test helping us to identify what we enjoy doing and what we're good at. The DISC method, spelt DISC, was first created by Dr. William Marston, who also invented the polygraph machine or the lie detector test, and who was also the creative genius behind the Wonder Woman comics. The DISC method is a tried and tested system for analysing personality to establish what kind of person we are, what characteristics we have, and the intensity of those characteristics. The DISC method is a great way to work out where our strengths lie, which can in turn help us to move towards establishing our true life's purpose. The word DISC itself is an acronym standing for different words that identify the 4 main personality types described in the model. So the D in DISC stands for dominance, and people with D personalities tend to be confident, placing emphasis on results. A D type of person likes to be in charge or is driven, likes to get things done, likes to make things happen. I in DISC is for influence. People with I-type personalities tend to be open and place more emphasis on relationships with people. I people like to influence and persuade others with their ideas. If you're an I-type person, relationships with people will take priority over tasks. Whilst, of course, both relationships and tasks are important to you, you will likely give natural priority to relationships with those around you before turning to your tasks. The S in DISC stands for steadiness. People with S-type personalities tend to be dependable, placing emphasis on cooperation and sincerity. S-type of people prefer a slower pace, and they like to take their time to build trust and relationships with people. Security and stability are the traits that S-type personalities place importance on. And the C in DISC stands for conscientious. Those with C-type personalities tend to place emphasis on quality, accuracy, and competence. C people like to ensure that products and services are performing efficiently and properly. In knowing our purpose in life and in acting out that purpose, we gain a benefit beyond satisfaction and a sense of well-being. It is reported on TonyRobbins.com that research has linked knowing our purpose in life to living longer, to having longevity. The website says, researchers surveyed nearly 7,000 older adults on the relationship between mortality and finding your purpose. Participants who did not have a strong sense of meaning in their lives were more than twice as likely to die prematurely as those who had figured out their purpose in life. having a sense of purpose also reduced the incidence of cardiovascular events like heart attack and stroke. So there you have it. There are plenty of incentives to finding out our true life's purpose. My fourth episode is entitled The Power of Language, and I mean that in the context mainly of mental health and how we as a society talk about mental health. Dr. Gabor Mate, in an interview with Brian E. Gordon, columnist for The Telegraph in the UK and a podcaster, says, "If I can change the language of addiction, I would cease using the word addict." Dr. Mate says that instead he would say about the person that they are going through something in their life that is causing them so much pain. So much pain that they don't know how to relieve it. And in trying to find some relief for their pain, they turn to certain behaviors or substances to relieve that pain. Dr. Mate says, nobody is their dysfunction. He says, it doesn't mean that that's who you are. It's something you did, and you did it for a reason. So there's much more to a person than their pain response. Someone labelled as an addict, for example, is also a father, mother, daughter, or son. Someone who feels and expresses love and joy. Someone who may be organised or someone who may be creative. By capturing and labelling a state or an illness, and then associating that label with a person, be it drug addict or alcoholic or gambling addict, we are using language to judge and label that entire being. We are drawing out and placing emphasis on one aspect of a person's behaviour which has arisen as a result of an intense pain and suffering response, which is what the behaviour is. That person does not know how else to seek solace from their deep-rooted pain. That person does not know how else to find some form, any form, of pain relief. Another aspect of this linguistic issue surrounding mental health is the division of physical and mental health. The very fact that mental health is a term of phrase separate to physical health tells us that one's mind and spirit is seen as something other than the physical body, something other than the whole person. Taking a more holistic approach to health would, in my view, work towards elimination of these divisions that currently exist. Yet another aspect of language is the language we use to talk to ourselves. How many of us berate ourselves for small and simple mistakes that we may make, whether at work or when parenting or in some other aspect of our daily lives? That's not to say that we should ignore or gloss over mistakes that we make. On the contrary, mistakes are there to be learnt from. Call them one of life's little lessons if you like. But rather than beating ourselves up for those mistakes, wouldn't it be easier, wouldn't it be less stressful to acknowledge we've made a mistake, see what we can learn from that mistake, and then speak to ourselves kindly about it and forgive ourselves for the mistake? We are often kinder to our friends than we are to ourselves. The language we use to console or encourage a friend is often not something we do with ourselves. The person with whom we spend the most time is ourselves. The person we should be delivering the most positive talk to is ourselves. The medical journal, The Lancet, on psychiatry confirms the power of language and how we respond to it in a 2018 article. It says, used in a constructive manner, language can have a substantial impact on people's lives. In the context of mental illness, mental health and well-being, negative words can be experienced as condescending, isolating, and stigmatizing, whereas positive words can convey dignity, empathy, and hope. Colleen Wojak comments, when used indiscriminately, words can create barriers, misconceptions, stereotypes, and labels that are difficult to overcome. Labels can promote separateness and isolation while promoting hierarchical power differentials. The Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford University reports that self-compassion, of which positive self-talk forms a part, has many benefits. Amongst these are resilience, increased productivity, and decreased stress. And in my fourth episode, The Power of Language, I take you through another cool little meditation, giving you affirmations that you can use on a daily basis to big yourself up, because quite frankly, you deserve to big yourself up. So please do turn on, tune in, and big up. My fifth episode, The 4 Agreements, is a discussion about Don Miguel Ruiz's acclaimed book of the same name. The Four Agreements is a Toltec wisdom book. The Toltec are the people who ruled Mexico around 1,000 years ago. Ruiz comes from the Toltec line, and he says of the Toltec that their shared experience of spirituality was passed down generation to generation. Ruiz brings this wisdom, this ancient wisdom, to the wider world in all of his books, including the Four Agreements. So what are the Four Agreements? The Four Agreements are, firstly, be impeccable with your word. Secondly, don't take anything personally. Thirdly, don't make assumptions. And finally, always do your best. As regards the first agreement, be impeccable with your word, this follows on from what I discussed on episode 4 as regards the power of language. Of this, Jack Cornfield says, one of the greatest blocks to loving kindness is our own sense of unworthiness. If we leave ourselves out of the circle of love and compassion, we have misunderstood. And one of the ways to get back to self-love and to self-compassion is to speak well to and about ourselves, and of course to and about others. As Ruiz says, being impeccable with your word is not using the word against yourself. The second agreement, don't take anything personally. Ruiz says of this, nothing other people do is because of you. It is because of themselves. He goes on to say, even when a situation seems so personal, even if others insult you directly, it has nothing to do with you. What they say, what they do, and the opinions they give are according to the agreements they have in their own minds. And whilst we have no control whatsoever over something that another person says or does, what we do have control over is how we react to the thing that is said or done. We can choose to react with anger or upset or both, or we can choose to acknowledge what's been said or done that we feel goes against us, and from there we can choose not to take it personally and to move on. The third of Ruiz's agreements is, don't make assumptions. By making assumptions, just like taking things personally, we give credibility to the story behind the assumption. We consider something that is not true to be the truth. We presume that something is the way we think it is, and we often do this without knowing anything about the facts behind the situation. We make an assumption. There are ways to stop making assumptions. One of those ways is to assess why it is that we are making the assumption that we are making. Is it because of bad or painful past experiences where we felt betrayed? Is that now causing us to react, to assume something because it's digging up painful memories? Are we perhaps completely unknowingly, are we expecting to be let down again? Are we expecting our trust to be breached again? If so, and we are able to identify what's going on, then that gives us perspective. It also gives us the opportunity to pause and reflect the next time something similar happens, and before jumping to conclusions and making assumptions. The fourth agreement is, do your best, which simply means that we are being invited to do our best with the first three agreements. As Ruiz says, under any circumstance, always do your best, no more and no less. But keep in mind that your best is never going to be the same from one moment to the next. Everything is alive and changing all the time, so your best will sometimes be high quality, and other times it will be not as good. When you wake up refreshed and energized in the morning, your best will be better than when you are tired at night. Your best will be different when you are healthy as opposed to sick, or sober as opposed to drunk. Your best will depend on whether you are feeling wonderful and happy, or upset, angry, or jealous. On episode 6, I turn my attention back to the issue of post-traumatic stress disorder, this time in the context of being there for a friend or relative with PTSD, which is also the title of the episode. I talk about some of the signs and symptoms that someone who is suffering with PTSD may display. Quite often, we are unable to identify when we ourselves or someone close to us may be suffering from a mental illness or some other mental health issue. And that is, sadly, because knowledge around mental health in society at large is still very lacking. We are not taught at school or at any time after that what the typical signs might be of someone being in mental distress. Physical distress, on the other hand, is something that as a society we are much more aware of. Almost all of us have at some point had some kind of first aid training. Many of us will have seen adverts for identifying when someone is having a heart attack or a stroke. And we all know to dial 911 if someone is seriously physically injured. But on the mental health side of health, it's only when someone studies medicine or psychology or another relevant discipline that we learn about these things. Therefore, one of the ways we can help ourselves and others to care for mental health, both inside and outside the context of PTSD, is by having some basic knowledge of the signs and symptoms of mental illness and being able to identify when there may be an issue. As regards PTSD, the Mayo Clinic identifies some of the symptoms of PTSD for which we can be on the lookout. These include experiencing recurrent distressing memories of the traumatic event, reliving the traumatic event as if it were happening again, in other words, having flashbacks, having upsetting dreams or nightmares about the traumatic event, or becoming withdrawn and not wanting to be around anyone. Identifying those signs in another person, of course, can be tricky. Some of the more outward signs that someone may be suffering PTSD include the person being easily startled or frightened, or always being on guard for danger. The person may display self-destructive behavior, such as drinking too much or driving too fast, or they may be irritable or have angry outbursts or display aggressive behavior. I also discuss ways in which we can help our friend or relative with their PTSD symptoms on my 6th episode. But the most important thing to say in all of this is that the need to look after ourselves and our own mental health when looking after someone else cannot be overstated. We absolutely must make sure that we are okay before we try to help anyone else. A bit like the safety demonstration on an aeroplane before takeoff, you put on your own oxygen mask first before assisting anyone else with theirs. My 7th episode is a fun one. One of the best ways of looking after our mental health is to maintain good physical health through exercise and by having a balanced, nutritious food intake. So, for this episode, I have my very first guests on my show, Ian Smith and Stella Noyons of F45 Cayman Islands. We chat about exercise routines, form, technique, nutrition, and of course the F45 challenge. We also talk about getting into exercise if it's your first time, or getting back into it if you've been away from it for a while. Ian also talks about life as a coach and business owner, and Stella discusses life as a nutritionist. And they both provide tips on how you can get into the fitness and nutrition industry if you are called to do so. I recorded episode 8 just after returning from the most amazing retreat experience at Blue Spirit, Costa Rica in Nosara, in Costa Rica. And the episode is called Self-Care, Costa Rica and Retreats. In that show, I talk about the importance of self-care and discuss how being in a retreat space can provide one of the best ways in which we can give ourselves some of that self-care. If you're starting your spiritual journey, or even if you are well on your way, by going on a retreat, whether that's a retreat over a weekend, a week, or even something longer, you will give yourself an opportunity to be fully immersed in the experience. And that's because once you're in that retreat space, once you're there with other like-minded people, people who you may not have met before, you will start to feel a shift in energy, a shift in how you feel. And you'll feel that shift because you are fully invested in being there with those people in that space. You're not doing anything else, so you are forced into being present and emotionally, physically, and spiritually available for the whole experience without distraction. You've probably also paid to be there, so you'll want to make the most of your investment. One of my favourite things about going on retreats is the opportunity truly to switch off and be wholly present with the experience and with the other people participating in the same event, without the interference of ringing phones or pinging text messages or beeping social media updates. And we all need a break from that every now and then. My very first full immersion retreat experience was up at the Omega Institute in New York State, just north of Poughkeepsie. It was here that I qualified as a Level 3 Reiki Master Practitioner. That retreat was held over the period of 1 week. And it was by being in that state of full immersion that I truly started to feel the benefits of and to develop a real appreciation for meditation. So much so that when I then got back down to New York City, one of my favorite places in the world, even though I had been missing steak and I had been missing red wine, I checked into my hotel and I sat. I sat on the armchair next to the window and looked out over New York City. And in those moments, I actually didn't want to be out there, back out there in the big, busy, bustling city. Instead, in those moments, I put on the heavenly mantra music of Deva Premal and Mitten, which I had just been introduced, and I sat and I meditated for an hour or possibly even longer. And then, once I had got myself centered again, and I was ready and I wanted to be out in the city, seeking out that steakhouse, I went for it. And I went for it on a tank that was 100% full and ready to deal with the energies and the busyness of the city. And in that lies one of the many and abundant benefits of meditation. By meditating, even if for 15 minutes a day, we allow our tanks to fill up. In the same way we eat food to nourish our bodies and our minds, and we drink water to hydrate our bodies and our brains, we meditate to nourish our minds and our spirit. The 9th episode of Shuvra Deb With You is a Christmas special and is about setting intentions for the new year. Of course, setting intentions doesn't have to be restricted to just the new year. We can set ourselves intentions at any time of the year when we feel called to do so. So this show really does have application throughout the entire year. I discuss how positive changes can be introduced into our lives by taking small incremental steps towards our goals. By taking these smaller incremental steps towards a bigger goal, before we realize that we are at the bigger goal. And if we don't quite hit the bigger goal in the time frame that we have set for ourselves, we have taken so many mini steps that we will be so far along the way to hitting that target. And we may even surpass our target, or find that by having set the right intention, unexpected and happy events coincide to push us along even further than we had hoped or expected. I also talk about the importance of maintaining regular check-ins with ourselves. Whatever intention or intentions we have set ourselves, we will be helping ourselves along the way so much by checking in with ourselves every week or month to see where we're at, to see how we're doing. If, for example, we feel like something is not really working for us, a monthly check-in is a great opportunity to look at whether something else or whether something additional may be required and may help us along on our journey to hitting our goal or our target. So we set our intentions, work out a plan consisting of bite-sized steps on how the intention will be achieved, and then, say every 4 weeks or so, we check in with ourselves. And we can be asking ourselves certain questions. How am I doing? How do I feel about what I'm doing? Am I doing too much? Am I not doing enough? Am I putting too much pressure on myself? Or am I not putting in enough work? And then, once we've sat down with those questions to ourselves, we can look at what could be done differently. And the answer to that, of course, could be nothing. Everything we're doing may mean we are completely on track and we're feeling great about seeing where the next month takes us. If so, we keep going. Goals can also be achieved by building on existing practices. I talk about how we may want to use our existing hobbies and passions to foster and grow new skills. I also invite seeing, sensing, and feeling yourself achieving your goals and aims, and I discuss creating a vision board as a way of accomplishing this. In that show, I also talk about abandoning negative self-talk on our journey to achieving our aims in life, and also how, by having gratitude, we can shift any stuck energies, and we can really start to see positive changes coming into our lives. I also discuss ceremonial ways of releasing the old in order to make space for the new, and I offer you a mantra in aid of this. I invite you to feel into a sense of separateness from old patterns, beliefs, ways of life. If you are an intuitive, spiritual person, you may wish to sit in quiet meditation and see, sense, and feel into those old ways that you would like to release. And once we have identified what needs to be released, an old relationship perhaps, an old belief about our self-worth, an old grudge against a family member, or an old behavior pattern causing problems in our life. Once we have identified what we wish to release, I guide you through a ceremony to help release the attachments that go with this. And for the more practically minded, I invite you to make a you plan, which is a bit like a business plan, but is a plan centered around you and what you want to achieve. And I conclude that show with some of the unnecessary things that might be in our lives which are time zappers and which may be stopping us from focusing on and achieving our goals. On episode 10, I explore the topic of change. I discuss how we can navigate and come to terms with situations in our lives where a change is forced upon us, for example, due to being dumped by a love interest, made redundant from a job, served notice by a landlord, or when our kids grow up and move out of the family home. I also discuss how to approach change when it is our choice to make that change, such as to move house or country, tips we can follow in any circumstance of change, areas where we should invite in change, and how to approach the situation of when we feel in our gut that we must make some kind of change in our lives. When we are faced with a situation of unwelcome change, our natural and instinctive reaction can be to resist and to wish as hard as we can wish that things aren't happening as they are and want everything to go back to how it was. The best personal example of this that I have relates back to the Hurricane Irma experience. By the time Irma came along, I had grown to love living in the BVI. And so, when, without any real warning, it all came to a crashing, thudding end, I was completely devastated. As a result, I struggled to let go of what had been and could not embrace what was the now. I struggled to move on, and that led to depression. Living in and hankering for the past caused me to be depressed. Not being able to find a way back to the BVI caused me anxiety. And all of that was going on in the context of suffering post-traumatic stress disorder as I was back then. I expended a lot of energy on being angry and regretful and resentful about no longer being in the BVI. I was resisting the change that was upon me, and I could not accept the finality of that change. But the problem with resisting change as it happens, the problem with resisting the flows and the ups and downs of life, is that that resistance only makes life harder and more stressful. That resistance only gets us stuck where we are even more. By resisting the change, by wanting to be in our past, we become stuck in a no man's land where we find ourselves unable to live in the present because we're fixated on the past. By not living in the present, we don't allow ourselves to experience our lives. We don't allow ourselves to move into the future. By what I call activating abundance, the details of which I go into in the show, I talk about how we can embrace change by taking the focus off the change. Instead, we can help ourselves out by switching our perspective to note the things for which we are grateful. This causes our spirit to start to lift immediately, which is a really useful tool when navigating change. I also discuss how we can have a pre-prepared story that we can tell to people when asked about a change that is going on in our lives, especially when that change feels uncomfortable to us and when we may not wish to discuss our situation in public. On the other hand, when the change in our lives is one of our own making, is one of our own choice, we may still experience an element of fear. But I talk about how we can use that fear as fuel, for example, giving us the energy to create a business plan. Finally, I talk about how to get around negative and blocking thoughts. I discuss how most of our negative and blocking thoughts can be dealt with logically, mainly by exploring the truth or falsity of those beliefs and thoughts. My next episode, which is the 11th episode, is a book review of 5 of my favourite books that I've read in recent years. And the timing of it at the start of the year is to help you set up your book list for 2023 if that's the kind of thing you like to do. I review Baptista Pape's The Power of the Heart, which is a beautiful short book providing a superb compilation of spiritual teachers' teachings containing excerpts of some of the great guidance they have spoken over the years. It's a great introductory book for anyone wishing to become more spiritual, for anyone seeking out their purpose in life, or for anyone wishing to be more present in the here and now. I then talk about Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's groundbreaking book, The Body Keeps the Score. This book provides an engaging and illuminating account of the author's professional career in treating trauma and PTSD. And whilst this book may seem like a science textbook, it is anything but that. The author seamlessly weaves together the science behind trauma and PTSD and recovery with well-narrated stories of his patients' journeys and their road to treatment for trauma and PTSD. Being Ram Dass by Ram Dass and Rameshwar Das is a book that depicts the colourful and full life of Richard Alpert, who became Ram Dass. His was a life fully lived, enjoyed and experienced. The book describes the story of a man who was completely unafraid of taking chances, completely unafraid of following his own convictions. Ram Dass is perhaps most well known for reminding us all to be here now, to be present and in the moment. The account of his life extols the virtues of having practices such as yoga and meditation, and how through those practices we move from living from our minds to living from our hearts. How we can move to being love as a state of being. In Discover Your Dharma, Sahara Rose, who is an Ayurvedic author and hosts a podcast called The Highest Self, shows us how to discover our dharma, which is our life's purpose. Sahara Rose has a unique approach on how we find our true life's purpose, in other words, our dharma. She invites us to discover our dharma through our 3 doshas, which are Vata, Pitta and Kapha. Doshas are the Ayurvedic mind-body types. The author has teased out the traits of each dosha based on the Ayurvedic elements of space, air, fire, water and earth, and she has devised a quiz comprising multiple choice questions, the answers to which get us closer to knowing our dharma, our purpose in life. And finally, Admiral William McRaven's book, Make Your Bed, provides 10 principles he learned during his Navy SEAL training that have helped him overcome challenges in both his professional and personal life. The book expands upon Admiral McRaven's inspirational speech of the same title, delivered at the 2014 commencement address at the University of Texas at Austin. Last week's episode, episode 13, is called Mental Health, Time to Act. This show came about as a result of some alarming statistics I had read the previous weekend in the Cayman Compass about the mental health situation right here at home in the Cayman Islands. The Compass reported on the 20th of January 2023. Data released this week by the Mental Health Commission indicates 107 people were admitted to hospital in 2021 after attempting to take their own lives. Meanwhile, almost 7,000 people on the islands were diagnosed with anxiety or depression in that year. The Commission noted a 72% increase in attempted suicides in the Cayman Islands since 2020. And similarly alarming figures can be found in the UK and in the US. The Guardian, the UK broadsheet publication, reported on the 3rd of January 2023, the number of children in England needing treatment for serious mental health problems has risen by 39% in a year. In the US, multiple sources report that 1 in 5 US adults experience mental illness each year. 1 in 20 US adults experience serious mental illness each year. 50% of all lifetime mental illness begins by age 14 and 75% by age 24. And this statistic, for me, is the most chilling. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the US, the CDC, suicide is the leading cause of death among young people aged 10 to 14 and 25 to 34. I talk about how something has to be done about this. As a community, we have to act to reduce the numbers of mental health issues that are so prevalent in so many communities far and wide. And there are a number of ways that we can all do this. These include educating ourselves on mental health in order that we may become aware of the signs and symptoms of mental illness or some other mental health issue in ourselves and in those close to us. We can attend and we can create events locally to raise awareness of mental health issues and to raise money for local mental health charities. As regards this, the Alex Panton Foundation, right here in the Cayman Islands, which provides funding and mental health support to young people up to the age of 30, is having its annual symposium on mental health at the Ritz-Carlton on Saturday, the 18th of February, I've already signed up, and I encourage anyone interested in this topic to do the same. And if you do sign up and you come by, come say hi to me if you see me there. Another way of raising awareness around mental health is to teach school-aged people about the importance of caring for their mental health and about how to spot signs of ill health. I also discuss accounts on that show of some of the most common mental illnesses, including postpartum depression, anxiety, and depression. I also give an account of my personal experience of suffering with post-traumatic stress disorder post-Hurricane Irma in the British Virgin Islands in 2017. I also explore what employers and health insurance companies can be doing to protect and maintain the mental health of the workforce. I discuss productivity and how countries such as the Netherlands, which has some of the most robust and comprehensive legislation protecting workers' mental health, also has one of the highest productivity rates of the OECD countries. Finally, I talk about some of the things that we can do ourselves to reduce our stress levels, allowing us to protect our own mental health. In rounding off, I hope that my shows sound like ones that you're interested in. If so, please keep tuning in to Bobo FM 89.1 every Thursday at 2 p.m, where my show drops first. I will be uploading the shows to my podcast the following week, so if you miss me here, please do head on over to Spotify and soon Apple and Google. If any of the topics I've discussed today have affected you, please do reach out to someone, whether it's a friend or professional support service. Here in the Cayman Islands, Infinite Mind Care provides counselling services and can be reached on 926-0882. The Alex Panton Foundation offers support for people up to the age of 30, and their information is on their website, alexpantonfoundation.ky. Loud Silent Voices provides mental health support too, and their number is 922-3847, and their email is info@lsv.support. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, bye for now. Thank you all so much for tuning in and for listening to Shuvra Deb with you. And please do tune in every Thursday at 2 p.m. on Bobo FM 89.1 for more topics related to and relevant to mental health. If any of you would like to reach out to me directly about any of the issues I've discussed, please do email me at shuvradeb82@gmail.com. That's spelt SHUVRADEB, the numbers 82@gmail.com. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening.